Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avataravarishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namah Sudhismritipurananam alayam karunalayam namami bhagavatpadam shankaram lokashankaram. So we are about to conclude our long discussion on the four Mahavakyas, the four great statements, which in a way harmonize and synthesize and summarize the essence of not only the Upanishads but also the entire four Vedic traditions. And today I want to present and explain one very important doctrine of Advaita Vedanta. It's related to the concept of the different doctrines of creation, the different doctrines of creation in Advaita Vedanta. So, broadly speaking, there are three approaches to the concept of creation in Vedanta. One is called Ajatavada, which says that actually there is no creation, because this world is not an absolute reality. It is not a paramarthika satta. The world is not a paramarthika satta. It is not an absolute reality. Now, what do you mean by absolute reality? The absolute reality should remain the same without any change in the past, present and future. It should not even be born. So if you say that it is absolutely real and it is born, then it is a contradiction. So it is called Ajatavada, means the doctrine of non-creation. This is the peak of Advaita philosophy. And for the first time it was expounded by a great philosopher who expounded Advaita Vedanta in his commentary on Mandukya Upanishad. You know, Mandukya Upanishad has got only 12 mantras, and a great scholar and a saint, Gaudapada, wrote a commentary in metrical verse, 225 verses he wrote, explaining Mandukya Upanishad, which is a very brief, a very short text, only 12 mantras, 12 statements, not in metrical form, but just statements. Sarvam Khyatad Brahma, etc., like that. The longest paragraph comes the seventh mantra. So it's a very brief text. And Gaudapada wrote a commentary on it in metrical form. It's called Karika. It's a commentary in metrical form in verses called a Karika. In prose it is called Bhashyam or Tika, shorter version. Now in this book he expounded this idea that actually there is no creation, because everything is Brahman. The world itself is non-different and non-distinct from Brahman in reality. Because if you remove the world, if you remove from the world its names and forms and its characteristics, which again are always in a flux, which change all the time, which are impermanent. So if you remove all these nama and rupa, names and forms and characteristics from the world, that is only Brahman. In other words, reading names and forms into Brahman is the world. Looking at the world devoid of name and form is Brahman. So what is the world? The world is nothing but the superimposition of names and forms on Brahman. And that superimposition takes place only because of our ignorance, avidya. So in reality, creation itself is a myth. It is not real. And real, in this, if you want to use the word real, Gaudapada accepts only paramarthika reality, paramarthika satta. He won't care for relative reality, pratibhasika, vyavaharika, this conceptual realities. For example, if you mistake a rope for a snake, the snake is pratibhasika, is conceptual. It is the result of your ignorance. So, Gaudapada has no time, no patience for that kind of analysis. He says, don't care for any of these things. The Brahman is only reality and everything else is asat. It is unreal. It is called Ajatavada, means the doctrine of non-origination, the doctrine of non-creation, which accepts only Paramarthika Satta. Remember, in fact, Shankaracharya also accepts this. But the difference between Shankaracharya and Gaudapada was this, or Shankaracharya and Ramana Maharshi, for your information. So many of modern students of Vedanta are excited by Ramana Maharshi's teachings. But what Ramana Maharshi and Gaudapada said was simple, in two different languages. They gave only the final conclusion. In other words, they just built an edifice. They did not build an elevator, what we call lift or ladder. Suppose, in other words, it is just a university. No kindergarten, no school, no college, nothing. You cannot directly go to a university, you have to begin with the kindergarten. What Shankara did was, he built up a huge university complex, but also he founded kindergartens for kids, creches, primary schools, lower primary schools for small children, and he also built gymnasiums for karma yoga, a gymnasium only. He built colleges, and those who go through this education, first you cannot understand Vedanta or Advaita. You begin with prayer and meditation. You go to a church or a temple and pray, thinking that God is sitting there or God is present there. If you pray, God will answer your prayers. Wonderful, fine. Shankaracharya say, okay, go ahead, do that. And then those who are more highly evolved, he gave them higher philosophy. And to those who have reached the highest level of evolution, he also gave them Ajatavada. But Ramana Maharshi and Gaudapada, Ramana Maharshi came very recently, close to our own times, Gaudapada 6th century AD, almost 150 years before Shankara. They gave only conclusions, they did not give explanations. They gave some universities, but there was no way to begin your education. Shankaracharya built a bigger university, but also started kindergartens, schools, primary schools, and also maybe for those who are mentally handicapped children, for them also he started many institutions. There are many different kinds of spiritual disciplines that mentioned in his Prakarana Granthas and also in his stotras, in his prayer books. He wrote more than almost 85 Sanskrit hymns, of which 68 are very important. Now, this is the highest, that is Ajatavada. This should be understood very clearly, because many of the problems that people face today, you read Ramana Maharshi and then you read Gaudapada, and if somebody tells you, I'm Brahman, that's my identity, or I become Brahman, people will misunderstand like that. If a child says he has a PhD, nobody will allow him to teach in a university. He has to begin with the kindergarten. So that should be understood. The Ajatavada is the last level of spiritual experience. It is not a philosophy. It is presented as a philosophy by Gaudapada in Mandukya Karika, Gaudapada Karika. I have given a very elaborate description of all this, more than 144 videos we can get in the YouTube, Gaudapada Karika, with different commentaries. The second approach in Vedanta with regard to creation or the doctrines of creation, is called, it's a very important term, Drishti Srishtivada. What it means is, creation is real, the world is real because of your ignorance. So, Srishti or creation depends upon Drishti because you experience it. For example, the most common example given by Shankaracharya in his commentaries and also by other commentators is Suktiga Rajadavat Avabhasade. Means a mother of the pearl that very closely resembles a piece of silver when seen on the seashore. In the evening, if you walk in the seashore or on the banks of a river, you can see small little shells of mother of pearl, small little creatures. The outer shell of these creatures very closely resemble a silver, because a piece of silver, because it is so bright, it's so shiny. So a little boy may mistake, little children may mistake those little pieces of mother of pearls for piece of silver. Now remember, actually you cannot say the child is wrong, because the child for that time being sees and creates. That is called Srishti. He creates silver on the mother of pearl. So, similarly, if you mistake a rope for a snake, for maybe 10 minutes you will be looking for a stick to bring to kill the snake, and finally you bring the light and there is no snake, only a rope. Now, Vedanta tells you, for half an hour during which you search for a stick to bring and to beat the snake, maybe many things have happened. You may jump, walk, run, and maybe you may get hurt. You're struggling to get a piece of, maybe a small stick, running for something. You make attempts to get something. Now, you cannot say that snake is totally unreal, because you created that snake in your mind. There are reasons for that. Adhyasa, Smriti Rupa, all these are in the Bhasha you find. So, in other words, Srishti or creation depends upon Drishti, means seeing, visualizing, experiencing. Now, the school of philosophers who accept the Drishti Srishtivada, they accept both Paramarthika Satta and also Pradibhasika Satta. Pradibhasika Satta is the silver that you by mistake superimpose on the mother of pearl, or something that the snake that you superimpose on the rope because there is not enough light. Like that, because we are ignorant of the truth that Brahman is only reality, that we ourselves are actually non-different from Brahman. We are ignorant of this highest spiritual truth. Ignorant in the sense we are not realized, not conceptual ignorance, not intellectual ignorance, but rather we have not experienced the fact of our oneness and unity with the entire existence. That ignorance, the ignorance is the cause of this creation. That's called Drishti Srishtivada. Srishti is there because there is Drishti. And Drishti means experiencing or seeing, is there because of our avidya or ignorance. They accept both the Paramarthika Satta and also they accept Pradibhasika Satta. The third school, it is called Srishti Drishtivada. What it means is, well, you accept the world is real for the time being. We cannot, the beginner cannot really say that the world is unreal. It will be either hypocrisy or it may be a mistaken notion that Advaita is just a concept, an idea or a doctrine, which it is not. It is only, essentially, is an experience. So, what really happens is, in Srishti Drishtivada, we accept Paramarthik Satta, Brahman, Pradibhasika Satta, for example, the example I gave, Rajatam, the silver that you superimpose on the mother of the pearl, and also this practical experience, the world in which we are living, the mountains, the bay, the streets, the people living around, the trucks, the cars which are moving, all this, and this, let us say, this public address system, and also the technical problems. All these are real, but they are not eternally real. They are only practical reality for the time being. So, vyavakarika satta, vyavahara buddhya means in terms of a practical experience, it is there. But then, when we realize that they are not actually permanent, then we realize that Brahman is only reality. Again, it is not understanding or knowing, but realization. So these are three important principles in Vedanta. Before we conclude this discussion on Mahavakyas, we should understand. Normally, in our spiritual life, in spiritual space, when we travel, we normally travel from Srishti Drishtivada towards Ajadavada, and there is a middle level when we travel through Drishti Drishtivada towards Ajadavada. So, you know why I'm mentioning this? Because in modern times, there is a big craze for some outstanding, imposing, high-sounding philosophical idea. You can always see many, I'm not criticizing, do these three things and you can be a Buddha in half an hour. You can find all this. I think I mentioned to you one interesting article that appeared in Global Vedanta. Maybe David, one of our close students, who attends the classes, will remember. Global Vedanta, there was an article long ago, just at that time it was a printed magazine, not online, as it is now. Not so fast, comma, O enlightened one. It was written by an American. So it was a reference to this trend to put Advaita and Vedanta in some kind of a unrealistic, as if some kind of a simple, exotic idea that anyone can take up and practice. It is not so. It's a matter of our own spiritual evolution. We have to take up a journey. We have to traveling from the early phase of taking interest in Vedanta, reading books, thinking, then disciplining our lifestyle, then prayer, meditation, and all rituals, puja, worship. If you are a Christian, if you are a Jew, if you are a Buddhist, you may have your own rituals. All these will eventually help you to realize that the God idea that you are praying to actually is within your own inner being. This can happen to any spiritual seeker in any tradition. So, in Shvedasudara Upanishad, in the Aitareya Upanishad that we have been discussing yesterday, we were actually mentioning that Adhyaropa and Apavada. This is the method used here. Adhyaropa actually means you superimpose the world in Atman. In the sense, after all, you have to begin your journey and you have to go to a kindergarten. So you learn the alphabet with great attention. And eventually, finally, when you reach the university, you don't have to worry about learning the alphabet. So first, we take for granted, in law, it may be called take for granted. For the time being, let us accept. For argument's sake, let us say, the world is real. Then look around and see what's the nature of the world. Everything in this world is changing, moving, everything is impermanent. So anything that is impermanent cannot be absolutely real. So when you do that, you slowly reject, give up this idea of the reality of empirical things. It is called apavada, prapancha nirasa, means rejecting the wrong notion that the world is real. That is prapancha nirasa. And that process is called apavada. So adhyaropa is the beginning. Apavada is the ultimate method that we use to go beyond and transcend the idea that the world is real. This is an important point, remember. Now in the Aitareya Upanishad, there are some very important scenes which I am going to discuss today. Hopefully we have time. Aitareya Upanishad has got some very interesting scenes, especially towards the end of the text where this Prajnanam Brahma, that mantra is expounded. So you can see, for example, in the mantra you find Koyam atma idi vayam upasmahe katarah sa atma yena va pasyidi yena va srunodi yena va gandhan ajigradi yena va vacham vyakarodi yena va swadu cha aswadu cha vijanati. What is this Atman? What is the nature of Atman? What kind of Atman should we meditate upon? Is this Atman intellect? Is Atman mind? And what's the true nature of Atman? A long discussion is happening here. Now, in Shankaracharya's commentary, and it is from the commentary that you get a glimpse of the cultural setting in which such discussion takes place. So I shall just read one important portion from Shankaracharya's commentary. Brahma vidya sadhana krita sarvatma bhava phala phalavaptim vamadevadi acharya paramparaya sutya avadyotamanam brahmavid parishadi atyanta prasiddham upalabhamana mumukshau brahmanaga adunatuna brahmajijnasavaha etc. Anitya sadhi sadhana lakshana samsara rajiva bhavat etc. Now one point is that, a group of scholars, saints and sages, they are sitting in a conference, in a meeting. The meeting is called Parishad. So this concept of Parishad comes only, not only in the Aitareya, but also in Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, etc. it comes. From the Bhashya, we get an idea of the intellectual culture of those times. Apart from philosophy, that also will be very interesting for us to understand. So here, Brahma Vidya Sadhana Krita Sarvatma Bhava Phalavaptim. Now, some great scholars, Vamadeva the Acharya Paramparaya. Now, some great sages in ancient times, like Vamadeva, who was one of the enlightened sages of those times, they have a lineage, Acharya Parampara. And they have already revealed these great truths in so many of their works and their instructions, and the Gurukula Parampara and this Rishi, the sage, the lineage of sages. They have taught their disciples, and who taught their disciples. Like that, this lineage continued. And then he says, Brahmavit Parishadi Atyanta Prasiddham Ubalabhamana Mumukshavaha. Brahmavit Parishadi. So it is an assembly or a conference in which the participants are knowers of Brahman, those who have realized the supreme truth that Atman is the only reality, Brahman is the only reality, and that Brahman, only absolute reality, That Brahman is present everywhere, present in everything. To understand the intellectual culture of those times, it may be very interesting in modern times, because you find you can get a glimpse of the sociology, the intellectual culture of those times. In fact, in one of the important Vedic constitutions called the Manusmriti, Manu himself outlines the rules for the participants, but what should be the qualifications of the participants who are actually involved in this kind of discussion. Such a discussion is taking place in the Aitareya Upanishad. Those of you who have got the text, we can see 3rd chapter, 1st section. Prathama Khanda means first Khanda, first section, 3rd chapter. So you can find this question. Koyam Atma idi vayam upasmahi. Who is this and what is this Atman? And what kind of Atman should we meditate upon? Should we contemplate upon? That discussion begins. Then they refer to some great teachings of ancient sages like Vamadeva, etc. Now, and then Shankaracharya says, this discussion is taking place in a Brahmavid Parishadi. It is happening in a Parishad. Parishad is an assembly of those who have realized the highest spiritual truth. In the Manusmriti, it gives many interesting glimpses into this ancient practice. For example, Dashavarava Parishadyam Dharmam Parikalpayes Trivaravapi Vrtastha Tam Dharmam Navichalayet. So, either there should be 10 great sages, learned people. The assembly should include scholars of the 3 Vedas. Atharva Veda is not mentioned, but Rig Veda, Yajur Veda and Sama Veda. Rig, Yajur, Sama Vedas. These 3 Vedas are mentioned. Atharva Veda is not mentioned because Atharva Veda also includes some references to some practices in ancient times. Atharva Veda actually includes some very wonderful, sublime poetry, praying to, the concept of looking at nature as our mother and so on. But also it includes some references, some practices which we call necromancy or black magic. Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Fast, those who read in English, so actually you can see that sort of thing. So, of course, in fact, Mandukya Upanishad itself is part of Atharva tradition, but the Atharva Veda Samhita includes some of these things. So, it was considered to be either a little less auspicious or maybe less sublime, not as sublime, not as great as Rig Veda, Yajur Veda or Samveda. So, and then two types of assemblies are mentioned. And one is Traividyo Hedugastarki Nairukto Dharmapataka Traischasramina Purve Parishad Syad Dishavara. This should be the Parishad, this should be the nature of the assembly of scholars who discuss higher philosophy. A distant glimpse of this you may come across if you read the history of Athens. 700 years before Augustine, during the time of Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, you can see the glorious picture of some kind of an ancient tradition where Greek scholars came and discussed and mentioned and have elaborate discussions on philosophical subjects. And then the list is given. So there should be 3 scholars, each specialist on Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda. Then there should be those who are specialized on epistemology, then somebody who is a specialist on logic, and those who have specialized on etymology, Nairukta, means those who have studied Nirukta, means Vedic Nikhandu and his later version Nirukta of Yaska, and those who know moral philosophy, and there should be those who are studying the Vedas, who are naturally unmarried, who are still going through this stage of novitiate, and there should be learned householders, and also there should be retired householders, Vanaprasthi. So, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha. So, all of them should form a group, and they are the ones qualified to discuss spiritual philosophy. Such an assembly of scholars used to be called Parishad. And there is another alternate suggestion also is given that Rigvedavid Yajurvidcha Samavedavidevacha Trivara Parishatnyeya Dharma Samsya Nirnayi. So whenever there is a conflict, there is a need to decide as to what is right, what is to be done, and what is the essence of a philosophical system or an important statement in spiritual literature. Then if you don't get so many others, if you don't get, for example, if you don't get linguists, etymologists, those who specialize in epistemology, moral philosophers, then at least you should get 3 scholars, each representing Rigveda, Yajurveda and Samaveda. This is the condition for discussion on philosophy. In such an assembly, a discussion begins. So those who have got the text later, you can refer to this. That is 3rd chapter of Aitareya Upanishad, 1st Khanda. That's the section where Prajnanam Brahma, the Mahavakya, which is used for Mananam, Lakshana Vakya, is mentioned here. So Shankaracharya writes, he continues this discussion, and he writes, Yam atmanam ayam atma iti saksha vayam upasmahi kassa atma iti yam cha atmanam ayam atma iti sakshat upasinaha pamadevaha amritaha samabhavat tameva vayam upasmahi, means ko na khalu sa atma iti. So that Atman, which is realized by great sages like Vamadeva, and by realizing which they realized Sarvam Khalidam Brahma, everything is Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma, Ayamatma Brahma. Those who realized, that's a path we have to follow. And then towards the conclusion it says, Prajnane Pradishthidam Prajnane to Lokaka Prajna Pradishtha. So this discussion continues at some point. It says, so the discussion is, whom should we meditate upon as Atman, as Brahman, whether Aparabhrahman or Parabrahman, whether Hiranyagarbha or some monotheistic God idea. So this is an important discussion that comes here. The Mahavakya tells you, the Mahavakya actually tells you that Prajna is Brahman. That's the Mahavakya. That's the statement, Prajnanam Brahma. Prajnanam means pure awareness, pure consciousness. In our real life, normal life, we cannot use the word consciousness or awareness without an object of which we are aware, or without something of which we are conscious. But suppose we take away the object and think of the pure awareness principle. The awareness is Brahman. That's the essence, that's the conclusion towards which the Upanishad will lead you. Before that, the discussion begins among the sages. Should we look upon one supreme presiding deity who delegates his spiritual responsibilities, taking care of the world, blessing the devotees and so on, to different subordinates? It's called monotheism. In a way, monotheism is in a way linked to polytheism. So, monotheism thinks of the absolute reality as a supreme God without a form, but with characteristics and qualities. So the question arises, can there be a monotheistic God who blesses the world, who creates this world, and who doesn't have a form? Because we know that God is compassionate, God takes care of us, etc. This is a normal idea. But we also say God does have a form. So, Vedanta may find some contradiction in this problem. So, from polytheism to monotheism, that's we find here in the discussion. Should we meditate upon one supreme God who has a definite form, who has a number of qualities and characteristics, who creates this world, who listens to our prayers? Or should we meditate upon one supreme spiritual principle, which is not a rejection of monotheism, but which actually goes beyond monotheism? We should remember, monism in fact doesn't reject monotheism. Monism transcends monotheism. Monotheism, the idea that God is not limited, not restricted by some names and forms and characteristics. Because if you define God, you are restricting Him, you are limiting Him. So, if you think of God as something that is infinite, the God idea is something infinite, the infinite reality should be beyond names and forms, not rejecting names and forms, but going beyond. In fact, as Sri Ramakrishna in simple language he says, he did not reject the idea of God with form. But he said that God without form, it transcends the idea of God with form. So you find among his own disciples, his lay disciples and also monastic disciples, he did not give the monistic idea or Advaita or non-origination doctrine Ajadavada to everyone. Maybe the only monastic disciple that Sri Ramakrishna selected exclusively for practicing Advaita in his pure form was perhaps Swami Vivekananda, who was not willing to accept it to begin with. But Sri Ramakrishna found he was the most suitable, most advanced seeker who was ready for it. For all others, including him, Mahendranath Gupta was the chronicler of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, who actually who preferred to practice the idea of the God without form. Sri Ramakrishna did not encourage that. So you can find a teacher gives not what the student asks, but what the student is in need of, what he is ready for. So, this is a discussion that begins. That is, the sages are discussing Koyamatma iti vayam upasmahe kataraka. Again, which of the two means Parabrahman or Aparabrahman? Whether God with form, it is Aparabrahman, God without form, Parabrahman, the monistic idea. Which of the two is true nature? And then he says, Yena va shabdam shrunoti, yena va gandhan ajighradi, yena va vacham vyakarodi, yena va swaducha asaducha vijanati. So this is an important point in Mahavakya Vichara, especially Prajnanam Brahma. So the discussion had already taken place in the previous sections, with the Brahman or Atman is something that reflects on Buddhi, on Antakarana, whether it's Chidabhasa, that is the reflection of Atman within our own Antakarana, in our Buddhi, intellect, or it is something subtle. All these discussions happen. Finally, the discussion slowly moves towards the conclusion that Prajnanam Brahma. That's the conclusion. So, that is Atman by which people can see forms, So you can find Yenava Shabdam Sunodi, Yenava Gandhana Achikrati, Yenava Rupam Pashyadi. It is Atman by which you are able to see forms, smell, you are able to experience smells, and also hear sounds. Everything happens in this world because of Atman. But Atman itself is a non-participating witness. That's a very important point, remember. A non-participating witness here means, that is Prajnanam. A participating witness, see, I'm aware of a chair or table or a car or something. There, the prajna, the awareness is linked to something, so it is limited. You take away all the objects and think of pure prajna, pure Atman. Pagarshena jayaditi prajna. That is the nature of Atman. That is the conclusion that we are being led to. And again, Hiredu Upayam Manaschaidat Sapjnanam Atmanam Vijnanam Prajnanam Meda Drishti Dhrudi Madir Manisha Judi Smurdi Sankalpa etc. Rudu Rasu Kamo etc. Anyway, so what it means is that is Atman, is they are thinking, this speculation is going on. Perhaps that is the nature of Atman by which a living being can see forms, hear sounds, smell, sense, articulate speech, vyakarodi, and discriminates swadu, aswadu, what is sweet, what is not sweet, and so on. That which is the heart and the mind is the same as that. Perception, direction, understanding, knowledge, retentive power, vision, firmness, power of reflection, freedom of thinking, mental repression, memory, recollection, determination, vitality, desire, love, all these are but names of prajnanam or consciousness. This is speculation that is going on. We experience various things, we see various things, we hear various things, and also all the functions, perception, direction, even getting tired, getting unhappy. So samjnanam, ajnanam, vijnanam, prajnanam, metha, drishti, dhriti, matir, manisha, all these, all possible conceivable functions of human mind and intellect, all these happen because of the presence of the prajnanam, the awareness, the consciousness. Because normally many things in the world may be existing, but they may not be aware of the fact that they are existing. So when existence and its awareness come together, and then that is what one level, then if you can detach awareness from its individual particles of existence, we think of awareness alone, pure awareness. That awareness is universal. That is a reflection of the Atman within. So that's one way of conceiving Atman. That's maybe no scientific. Psychologically, that's the most logical way of thinking of Atman. So if you are conceiving of a God who is angry or unhappy or cruel or helping you or maybe not helping you, listening to your prayer or not listening to your prayer, sending to heaven or hell, whatever it is, you are actually limiting God to a function. Not very different from human beings of similar qualities and characteristics. When you think of the divine principle that is present everywhere as universal awareness, and when the universal awareness is linked to the mind, and when mind acts, functions along with the eyes, that awareness principle becomes the instrument for you to see something. Similarly, the awareness principle, with the help of mind and sense of hearing, hears something. So in perception also, the awareness principle is the non-participating witness. So that is the most logical way of understanding Atman. This discussion continues. After this discussion, perhaps I can discuss the Mahavakyas in the light of the Panchadashi. Of course, I already discussed I am Atma Brahma from Mandukya Upanishad, and next session will conclude that with a few important references from Panchadashi in its fifth chapter. Panchadashi discusses the Mahavakyas. Of course, it's a very elaborate discussion, but today I wanted to give one important idea, that when we try to understand these Mahavakyas, we should remember there's an evolution taking place. For a beginner in spiritual philosophy, you have to accept this world is real for the time being. Then you analyze the nature of the world, you pray and meditate, you evolve. Slowly a point comes, we reach a stage where we become aware of this inescapable conviction that everything in this world is absolute. It's not real in a sense. It changes. There is something higher. It's part of human evolution and refinement. That is Srishti Drishtivada. And when we go beyond that, Drishti Srishtivada. Of course, this evolution doesn't happen always at the intellectual, conceptual level. It also happens at the level of spiritual evolution. And then Ajadavada. The reason why I refer to this problem in modern times, because there is a lot of discussion going on, and especially with this, the invasion of internet and YouTube, frequently the scientific structure of Vedanta that Shankaracharya laid before us, not only Shankaracharya, it's also Ramanuja, all the great teachers have done it. They didn't present this idea as an intellectual concept. It is something that is linked to our life. So, all these three approaches are real, but in the Mahavakyas we can see an attempt to connect with the transcendental at the intellectual level. And after connecting our mind to the transcendental idea, we should not give up our regular practices like meditation, prayer, or reading scriptures and so on. Because that alone can take us to the next level. Because the journey is not at the intellectual level, the journey is taking place in the spiritual space. So we'll have interaction. You're most welcome to ask questions. Thank you. Namaskar.
Swami,
Yeah.
my question is, what is the what from the perspective of the absolute, what is the avatar?
Avatar, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what is the Advaitin, the realized
Yeah.
soul see
Yeah.
in the avatar?
Yeah. Actually, Sri Ramakrishna himself has given the idea. Avatars are like huge waves in an ocean. Or avatars are like huge ships Still, the ship is different from the ocean. The ship has to travel on the ocean surface. It's an important thing. And another example Sri Ramakrishna gave was the Upanishad Mahamatsya Drishtanta, a huge fish that is access to both the banks of the river. So avatars are huge ships. So you have heard of this idea of Bhava Mukha. It's a very famous concept in Sri Ramakrishna literature. It has been expounded very scientifically by Swami Sharadananda in the Great Master. You have very interesting Bhava Mukha. The idea is that is a threshold. So if you are standing on the threshold, you can enter the room, you can also come out of the room. You have freedom for both. Or a person who owns a house with so many rooms, he has access to all the rooms. But he's not in the sense, but he cannot be in all the room all the time. But there is no room that will close its doors in front of him. So avatars are those who have realized this supreme truth that we are discussing, but going beyond that level, but can function as big ships that can take passengers from one shore to another shore. So avatars are Advaita Muktas, liberated souls of the highest order. That's the one thing we can say from Advaitic perspective. Avatars are Jivan Muktas of the highest order. Highest in the sense they can function, they are epoch makers, they can help people, spiritual seekers in so many ages in their spiritual life. So from a Sri Ramakrishna's perspective, great spiritual teachers who have taught great spiritual truths and continue to influence in a positive way. The positive way I have to emphasize, because many of the avatars do not always influence in a positive way. So, all epoch makers don't influence humanity the way a Christ or a Buddha or a Sri Ramakrishna or a Shankaracharya influence. Influence can be in a very unpleasant way also, to put in mildest possible vocabulary. So, that's an important thing. So Swamiji says, if somebody tells you he's inspired, and then his teachings create all kinds of problems for the world, then you should be very careful what kind of inspiration he has got. He says, of course, he uses a strong language in that sense. If somebody says he's inspired and talks nonsense, reject him. That's the point, which I don't want to quote in so many words. So, avatars are these epoch makers whose personality, as much as the teachings, influence and shape and define human destiny in a very pleasant, in a very positive manner. That's the idea. That's the Hindu way of looking at avatars. Yeah.
There's a question from YouTube.
Yeah.
The question asks, is Prajnanam of the Vedic Prajnanam Brahma same as Prajna of Mahayana Buddhism or Panya of Theravada Buddhism?
Yeah, you can say more or less saying, but Prajnanam Brahma is a state of total Atma Jnanam or Brahma Vidya, Jiva Brahma Aikyam. There is a problem of language, vocabulary, and also there's a metaphysical conflicts. Buddhism, Buddhism, we should always understand when after reaching the prajna, you read nirvana, and nirvana is associated with ananda, with blissfulness. So if everything is, if you accept Nagarjuna, it's a kind of total nihilism, Sunyavada. There is a logical problem not spiritual problem, but logical problem. Maybe because there are many gaps in Buddhist logic and epistemology. That could be partly the reason. Not a spiritual problem, because Buddhism produced so many outstanding great spiritual teachers who in no way are different from the great sages of any other religious tradition, either Christianity or Hinduism or Judaism or Jainism. You don't find, in terms of the spiritual stature, the personality and characteristics, you don't see any difference. So that's why I said it's not a spiritual problem, it's a problem of epistemology and the vocabulary used in explaining things. So that's a problem,
Pranam Maharaj.
Namaskar, yeah.
So Maharaj, so you explained Ajatavada, Srishti Drishti and Drishti Srishti, right?
Yeah.
My question is Madhusudan Saraswati's Advaita Srishti, Advaita
Advaita
Siddhi, right? Can it be classified as Ajatavada or Srishti Drishtivada?
No, Madhusudana doesn't belong to Ajavada, because Madhusudana actually integrated bhakti into his tradition. In Advaita Siddhi, Madhusudana's defense of the 5 definitions of Mithyatvam, which are found in Padmapada's Panchapadika and then Prakashatmayadi's Panchapadika Vivarana. 2 definitions are taken up from Panchapadika Vivarana, and the 4th definition is taken from Chitsuki, yeah, and the 5th one is from Ananda Bodha, Nyaya Deepavali. So these are 5 definitions. So the point is, when you look at Madhusudana's defense of the 5 definitions, Sadasatta Anadhikarnatva Mithyatvam Panchapadika, the present Pradipanno Bhado Traikalika Nisheta Pradiyogitvam va Mithyatvam in Panchapadika Vivarana Prakashatmayadi, then Jnana Nivartitvam va Mithyatvam, that is also Panchapadika Vivarana, and Swatsya Nishtha Atyanta Bhava Pradiyogitvam va Mithyatvam in Chitsukacharya's Chitsuki, and also Sat Viviktatvam va Mithyatvam in Ananda Bodha's Nyaya Deepavali. There are 5 definitions, which Nyayamritakara, that is Vyasa Tirtha criticized and Madhusudana defends in Advaita Siddhi. So the point is, if you concentrate on Madhusudana's main thesis in Advaita Siddhi, you can say he includes in his thesis both Ajatavada in some points, but also the Drishti Srishtivada of the other one, which accepts of Pradibhasika and Pradamatika Sabda both. But in Gudartha Deepika, he tends to cling to Srishti Drishtivada, because he talks of Vyavaharika, he becomes a bhakta. Gudartha Deepika is, those who are not, just to give a background information, Gudartha Deepika is very unique in one way, because he is Madhusudana was a close follower of Shankaracharya, a humble, in his own language, a humble follower of Shankaracharya, but he integrated bhakti into his system. This bhakti which Madhusudana integrates into Gudartha Deepika is not his own making. That bhakti can already be found in Shankaracharya's stotras and also in his own Gita Bhashya. Remember, people make a terrible mistake, and it's a crime against Vedanta when they do not consider Shankaracharya's stotras, bhakti stotras, when they think of his Advaita Vedanta. So there are people who stupidly, foolishly imagine that Shankaracharya did not accept bhakti. They cannot be more wrong, because the most profound and the most moving Sanskrit poetry devotional poetry in Sanskrit are coming from Shankaracharya. Of them, 68 are the most profound. There are also others. you cannot find, none of the Bhakti Acharyas could write anything comparable to Anandalagiri, Sivanandalagiri, Subramanya Bhujangam, Devi Aparadakshamamana Sutram, Shiva Aparadakshamamana Sutram. Can you imagine anyone writing such moving poetry? So Madhusudana was actually bringing Shankaracharya's devotion back to Advaita in Gurartha Dipika. But remember, these are two different levels. Madhusudana's main purpose of Advaita Siddhi that you referred to, his purpose was to answer, to defend Vedanta against Vyasatirtha's criticism in Nyayamrita. That was single purpose, the only purpose. It's one of the most profound dialectical works, no doubt. But its only purpose was to defend Advaita against the onslaughts of Vyasatirtha in Nyayamrita, which is one of Vyasatirtha's magnum opus. But in Gurartha Dipika you find he clings closer to Srishti Drishtivada. He accepts Paramarthika, Pradibhasika and also Vyavaharika, which is an important characteristic of bhakti, without accepting Vyavaharika, he cannot think of bhakti. So it's an important point to remember. So what I mean to say, Madhusudana Saraswati in Advaita Siddhi clings to Ajadavada in many places, but also to Drishti Srishtivada. At the same time, and actually in some places, Vyavaharika Sattva also accepts. But in Gurartha Dipika, you can find if you want to give him a place among the three schools, that is Ajadavada, Drishti Srishtivada and Srishti Drishtivada, then it is the third mentioned, Srishti Drishtivada, that is closer to. Because Srishti Drishtivada is also called Vyavaharika Paksha, Vyavaharika Vada. Others don't accept Vyavaharika Sattva. Okay, thank you. May add one more, because many of our listeners may not be familiar with the terms I used. For those, the information for those, Madhusudana is considered to be one of the most prominent Advaitins belonging to post-Shankarite period. Especially post-Shankarite period, after Shankaracharya's own disciples. We cannot compare with Shankaracharya disciples. After that, so there was a dialectical confrontation, warfare between Dvaitins and Advaitins right from 10th century AD onwards. And in this confrontation, you'll find great names. The great names in Dvaita tradition were Vadatirtha, Jayatirtha, and the greatest of them was Vyasatirtha. He was actually a very prominent person, an outstanding sage also, a great saint. In Advaitin tradition, after the direct disciples of Shankaracharya, because direct disciples also wrote book, Sureshwara wrote Vartikas, Brihadaranyaka, Taittiriya and so on, Panchapadika, of course, Padmapada and others. Then there were, of course, Bhamadi, Vajaspadi, then there was Sikharsas wrote Khandana Khadya, and then Chitsukacharya wrote, Prakashatmedi wrote, Vidyaranya wrote, and many others. There was this dialectical confrontation. And so, the turning point was Vyasatirtha's Nyayamrita, which was a very profound, philosophically and logically very profound attempt to refute Advaita. And that refutation was based on a premise which was logically not tenable, because he called Vedanta, Advaita, he called Mayavada. So Vedanta is not Mayavada, Vedanta is Brahma Satyam, that's the main doctrine. So he called Mayavada, the word Ma, it is not Mayavada, it is Brahmavada. So as it is almost like in law, it is a judge will not allow you to proceed with that kind of argument. You assume that the other party, your opponent has said something, you try to refute it. you cannot refute something that you just allege another person has said without his real statement. So, again, about the Vyasatirtha's misunderstanding of the concept of avidya, so again, he gives his own interpretation to Advaitic doctrines, then he refutes them. So this is the point. So this Madhusudana Saraswati points out all these logical fallacies, and he wrote Advaita Siddhi as a rejoinder to Vyasatirtha's Niyayamrita. So this is the picture that you have to keep in mind when our devotee, I don't remember, your Indranil, who wrote this? Oh, you're Indranil. I could not recognize you. He's a professor, University of North Dakota. I met you there. I met you at the university. Okay. Thank you. Please continue. Please continue next. Yeah.
Swamiji, I have a clarification.
Yeah,
you
please.
described the composition of a parishad a short while ago.
Yeah.
Is this also from the Aitareya Upanishad, or is there another source for this? You talked about how a parishad is composed of people from different groups and so on.
Yeah.
So what's the source of that description?
Oh, what I said. Okay. My description of Parishad is for Manusmriti. Yeah. Please remember Manusmriti. That's the source of description. It is from Manusmriti, where Manu himself defines who should be the members of the Parishad. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Maharaj, I'd like to ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
on the Parishad,
Yeah.
from the Manusmriti.
Yeah.
This tradition seems
Yeah.
so essential.
Yeah.
How do you see that fitting into the way we approach it today? It seems as though when there are times when that seems to work very well and is highly regarded and appreciated. There are other times when that's seen as the operation of elites in an ivory tower. To me, it seems essential. How do you regard it?
In this Parishad concept.
Yes.
Okay. Now to begin with, it comes in the 12th chapter of Manusmriti, for information. Those who can write. 12th chapter of Manusmriti. Basically, history was an important subject in my academic career. But from a historical perspective, I think it gives you a glimpse into the glorious tradition of debates and discussions in those days. So, actually, the mantra, the statement in the Aitareya Upanishad is very ancient. It's from, it is from Rigveda Samhita, Aitareya Upanishad. It's very ancient. But Manusmriti is of a later origin. Maybe around, perhaps we can say about 900 BC or 1200 BC. Okay. So the point is, and Manu defines he defines what should be the qualifications for the participants of this assembly, Parishad. So from that we understand these were the high level of discussions and debates. In a way, it's very important. I was referring to the pre-Augustinian Greece. Rather, I would say maybe third century Athens or 4th century Athens you can find. You cannot even conceive of a man like Socrates or Plato and Aristotle without some kind of a glorious tradition of debates by people who had certain intellectual qualifications, in a way spiritual qualifications to do justice to their position as participants in a discussion, important discussion. Of course, the problem today is people want everything in a very simple. It's a very dangerous and very tricky word. You should put everything in simple. So, but you can write a manual for a machine in a very complicated language. But philosophy should be put very simple. You often find people, you should not quote any scriptures, you should not listen to, because that's all your bombastic intellectual arrogance. So you should put everything in a simple language. In a way, actually you're depriving humanity of an opportunity to refine their culture and tradition, their mind and emotions. When you tell them, don't go for anything profound. Usually everything should be simple. That's the thing. There should be the cult of profundity, a higher philosophy, higher thinking, because that saves humanity from many other dangers, which are inevitable in an age of internet, superficiality, and all these things, So anyway, I will go further. So what you said is absolutely correct. Higher qualification, deep thinking, moral, authority, and understanding of the original scriptures. I tell you, it's something very important. Swami Vivekananda's original purpose, Swamiji wanted that we should expound Vedanta, but should be done by people who have actually read the original text. You can use English language, but the person who interprets the philosophy should have real acquaintance with the scripture, Yeah, that's the idea.
This is the idea that Shankaracharya had in establishing
monastery, You can think of your own tradition. See, I think I told you in the early 70s or 60s, I used to take many of our very senior monks of Ramakrishna Mission to one of the oldest Jewish synagogues in Cochin. So in 70s and early I visited even earlier in the 60s as a student, and I found some very ancient looking scholars, very old. They are going through the old manuscripts, reading and continuing an ancient tradition. They are reading Torah and Talmud, but the point is that tradition has something very profound and holy about it. It's what actually preserves humanity. So also Vedas. So also of course, I would say in Christian tradition, maybe the commentaries of Augustine, Aquinas and others have the same place in Christian tradition. Reading them, understanding them in a way saves humanity from going in some other unpleasant directions, That's the idea behind it. Yeah. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.